The sirens cut through the oppressive July heat, like razor blades. Their wailing crescendo, bouncing off the pristine facades of Willowbrook Heights. Paramedic Jake Morrison jumped from the ambulance before it fully stopped, his boots hitting the scorching asphalt as he sprinted toward the small crowd gathered on Maple Street. What he saw made his blood run cold. 11-year-old Rosie Martinez lay motionless on the sidewalk, her brown hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face an alarming shade of gray. Her pink sundress clung to her small frame, dark with perspiration, while a woman in a crisp white polo shirt and khaki shorts stood directly over her, arms crossed, blocking anyone from getting close. "Move aside, ma'am. We need to get to her now." Jake's voice carried the authority of someone who had seen too many emergencies turn fatal because of delays. The woman, a badge reading HOA Community Safety Officer gleaming on her chest, didn't budge. Her name tag identified her as Karen Whitmore, and her steely blue eyes held a stubborn certainty that made Jake's stomach clench. "I've been monitoring the situation. She's been lying there for exactly 8 minutes, and I can assure you she's perfectly fine, just looking for attention." Jake pushed past her, dropping to his knees beside Rosie. Her skin was clammy and cold, despite the 90-degree heat, her breathing rapid and shallow. His partner, Sandra, was already pulling equipment from the ambulance, but Jake could hear Karen's voice rising behind him. "This is ridiculous. I know this girl. She walks through here every day, causing disruptions. Just last week she was running around with other kids, making noise during quiet hours." The story of how this moment came to be had begun 43 minutes earlier, when Rosie Martinez had set out from her grandmother's house with a wrapped present tucked under her arm and excitement bubbling in her chest. Her cousin Miguel was turning 7 today, and she couldn't wait to see his face when he opened the remote control helicopter she'd saved her allowance for 3 months to buy. The walk from Abuela's house to Miguel's family's apartment was only 12 blocks, a journey Rosie had made dozens of times before. But today, the sun blazed overhead like an angry eye, and the humidity hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. Rosie had always been a bigger girl, something that made her self-conscious, but that her family embraced with fierce love. "Mi gordita hermosa," her grandmother would say, squeezing her tight. "You are perfect, just as God made you." But the extra weight made hot days harder, and today was the hottest day of the summer so far. By the time she reached Willowbrook Heights, the gated community where she had to pass through to get to Miguel's place, sweat was pouring down her face. The security guard, Mr. Peterson, had waved her through with a kind smile. "Hot one today, kiddo. You got water?" Rosie had nodded, though she'd forgotten her water bottle in her excitement. The community sidewalks were perfectly maintained, lined with flowering bushes and decorative lampposts. But there was no shade. The sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way through the winding streets. That's when she first noticed Karen Whitmore. Karen was washing her silver SUV in her driveway, the hose creating a rainbow mist in the blazing sunlight. She wore the unofficial uniform of the self-appointed community enforcer, crisp white polo, pressed khaki shorts, and a baseball cap with Willowbrook Heights Community Safety embroidered in gold thread. A clipboard sat on her car's hood, no doubt filled with violations she'd documented throughout the day. When Karen spotted Rosie, her face immediately hardened. "Excuse me, young lady, do you live in this community?" Rosie paused, clutching Miguel's present tighter. "No, ma'am. I'm just walking through to get to my cousin's birthday party." Walking through, Karen's voice carried a tone that suggested this was somehow criminal. "Are you aware that this is a private community? We have rules about loitering." "I'm not loitering. I'm just walking to Pine Valley Apartments." Mr. Peterson at the gate said it was okay. Karen's eyes narrowed. Well, I'm sure he did. But I'm the one who ensures our community standards are maintained. You're dripping sweat all over our clean sidewalks. The comment hit Rosie like a physical blow. She glanced down at the concrete, seeing a few drops of perspiration that had fallen from her face. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. See that you are, and next time, maybe consider taking a different route. One more appropriate for pedestrians like yourself. The way Karen said pedestrians like yourself made it clear she meant something entirely different. Rosie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, and she hurried away, Karen's disapproving stare boring into her back. 2 blocks later, the world started to spin. It began as a subtle dizziness, like stepping off a merry-go-round. But within minutes, the sensation intensified. The perfectly manicured lawns seemed to tilt and sway, and the sound of sprinklers became a roaring waterfall in her ears. Her vision blurred, turning the bright summer day into a smeared watercolor painting. Rosie knew something was wrong. She'd felt this way before, during her last diabetic episode 6 months ago, but she'd been managing her condition so well lately, checking her blood sugar religiously, taking her medication exactly as prescribed. She'd even had a normal reading that morning. What she didn't know was that the stress of Karen's confrontation, combined with the extreme heat and her forgotten water bottle, had triggered a dangerous spike in her blood glucose levels. Her body was shutting down, desperately trying to cope with the metabolic crisis brewing in her small frame. She stumbled toward a large oak tree, hoping to find shade, but her legs gave out before she could reach it. The wrapped present tumbled from her arms as she collapsed onto the sidewalk, her world going dark. Mrs. Chen had been watering her garden when she heard the thud. Looking over her fence, she saw Rosie lying motionless on the concrete, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. "Oh my God!" she cried, dropping her watering can and rushing to the gate. But before she could reach the girl, Karen Whitmore appeared, jogging down the street with her clipboard in hand. "What's going on here?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp with authority. "This poor child collapsed. We need to call 911 immediately." Mrs. Chen was already reaching for her phone. "Wait." Karen held up her hand, studying Rosie's still form with the clinical detachment of someone examining a sidewalk crack. "I know this girl. She was just here 20 minutes ago. Perfectly fine. She's probably just looking for sympathy." "Sympathy? Are you insane? Look at her." But Karen was already moving closer, her expression darkening. "These kids today, they'll do anything for attention. Trust me. I've seen it all in my 15 years of community safety work. The moment we call paramedics, she'll miraculously recover." Mrs. Chen stared at Karen in disbelief. "She's unconscious." "She's faking it. Watch." Karen crouched down and clapped her hands loudly near Rosie's ear. When the girl didn't respond, Karen's confidence wavered for just a moment before hardening again. "She's committed to the act. I'll give her that." By now, other neighbors had emerged from their houses. Mr. Patterson, a retired nurse, tried to approach, but Karen stepped directly into his path. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow anyone to interfere with what is clearly a staged incident. As the designated community safety officer, I have a responsibility to prevent panic and maintain order." "Karen, get out of my way." Mr. Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 30 years in emergency medicine. "That child needs immediate medical attention." "And create a precedent for every kid in the neighborhood to fake medical emergencies when they want attention? I don't think so." The standoff continued for precious minutes, while Rosie lay motionless on the burning concrete. Karen positioned herself like a guard dog, using her body to block access, while maintaining her bizarre theory that an 11-year-old girl would fake a medical emergency for attention. "Look at her skin color, Mrs. Chen pleaded. "She's gray. Children don't turn gray when they're pretending." "It's hot. She's probably just flushed from the heat and being dramatic." Karen's voice held the absolute certainty of someone who had never been wrong about anything in her life. "Give her 5 more minutes, and she'll get bored with the charade." But 5 minutes stretched into 8. Then 10. More neighbors gathered, their voices rising in concern and anger. Some tried to push past Karen, but she stood her ground with the stubborn immovability of a boulder. "I'm calling 911 whether you like it or not, Mr. Patterson finally declared, pulling out his phone. "You'll be wasting city resources on a child's tantrum," Karen shot back. But she could hear the doubt creeping into her own voice. Rosie hadn't moved, hadn't even twitched, in over 10 minutes. The emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through Mr. Patterson's phone speaker. 911, what's your emergency?" "We have an unconscious child on Maple Street in Willowbrook Heights. She's been down for at least 10 minutes. We need paramedics immediately." Age of the child: approximately 11 years old. She's unresponsive and appears to be in medical distress. Karen finally stepped back, her face pale. For the first time since this ordeal began, she seemed to grasp that she might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. But instead of admitting her mistake, she doubled down. "When she gets up and starts laughing, don't come crying to me about the false alarm charges." Now, as Jake Morrison knelt beside Rosie's still form, he was piecing together the timeline that had led to this moment. His trained eyes took in the signs of severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. But something else was troubling him. The girl's breathing pattern, the way her body was positioned, the almost waxy quality of her skin, all pointed to something more serious than heat stroke. "How long has she been down?" he asked the crowd. "At least 15 minutes, Mrs. Chen replied, shooting a venomous glare at Karen. "That woman wouldn't let anyone near her. She said the child was faking it." Jake's jaw tightened. 15 minutes of delayed treatment could mean the difference between a full recovery and permanent damage. He began checking Rosie's vitals while Sandra prepared the IV equipment. "Blood pressure's dropping fast," Sandra called out. "We need to get fluids into her now." As Jake lifted Rosie's wrist to check her pulse, something caught his eye. A thin medical alert bracelet, the kind that thousands of children with chronic conditions wore every day. He turned it over, and the engraved words hit him like a thunderbolt. "Type 1 diabetes, high risk, emergency contact, Maria Martinez." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's eyes found Karen's face, and he watched the color drain from her cheeks as the full magnitude of what she had done settled over her like a suffocating blanket. "She's diabetic," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "This isn't heat exhaustion. She's in diabetic ketoacidosis." The medical terminology meant nothing to most of the neighbors, but the gravity in Jake's voice was unmistakable. Sandra was already preparing a glucose test, her movements quick and efficient. "Blood sugar's over 400, she announced. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Karen stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. The weight of her actions was crushing down on her. But even now, her pride wouldn't let her admit complete fault. "How was I supposed to know she was diabetic? She didn't tell me." "Because you didn't let anyone examine her." "Mr. Patterson's voice rose to a shout. "You stood there like a guard dog protecting your precious community from a dying child." Jake was already lifting Rosie onto the stretcher, his movements gentle but urgent. "Sandra, call ahead to St. Mary's. Tell them we have a pediatric DKA case, delayed treatment, possible complications from prolonged unconsciousness." As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens wailing once again, Karen found herself standing alone in the street, surrounded by neighbors whose faces reflected a mixture of disgust, anger, and disbelief. The weight of their stares felt heavier than the oppressive July heat. "You could have killed her," Mrs. Chen said quietly, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "That beautiful little girl could have died because of your arrogance." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in her 15 years of self-appointed authority, she had no response, no regulation to cite, no rule to enforce, no justification for her actions. The news of the incident spread through Willowbrook Heights like wildfire. By evening, the community's social media groups were buzzing with accounts of what had happened. Videos taken by neighbors on their phones showed Karen blocking access to Rosie, her voice clearly audible as she insisted the child was faking her medical emergency. Maria Martinez received the call at work, her world shattering as the doctor's words reached her ears. "Your daughter is in critical condition. Her blood sugar levels were dangerously high for an extended period. We're doing everything we can. But the delayed treatment has complicated her condition." She raced to the hospital, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. Rosie had been managing her diabetes so well. They'd been so careful, so vigilant. How had this happened? At the hospital, she learned the full story from the paramedics who had treated her daughter. The 15-minute delay, the woman who had blocked medical assistance, the community safety officer who had decided that an unconscious 11-year-old was staging a performance for attention. Maria's grief transformed into a cold, focused rage that burned brighter than the July sun. Meanwhile, at Willowbrook Heights, an emergency meeting was being organized. The Homeowners Association Board, led by President Patricia Hoffman, had been fielding angry calls all day. The videos were already going viral on social media, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. "We need to address this situation immediately," Patricia announced to the board members gathered in the community center. "Karen's actions have not only endangered a child's life, but have also exposed our entire community to potential liability." Board member David Kim shook his head in disbelief. "I've been saying for months that Karen's authority has gone to her head. She's been treating this place like her personal kingdom." "The question is, what do we do now?" asked Treasurer Ellen Rodriguez. "The legal ramifications alone could bankrupt our association." Patricia's phone buzzed with another incoming call. Channel 7 News, wanting a statement about the incident. She declined the call and turned back to the board. "We need to act decisively. Karen's appointment as community safety officer is effective immediately terminated." But termination was the least of Karen's worries. Detective Ray Solano had been assigned to investigate the incident after the hospital reported the case to Child Protective Services. The combination of eyewitness accounts, video evidence, and medical records painted a clear picture of criminal negligence. 3 days after the incident, as Rosie lay in the pediatric ICU fighting for her life, Detective Solano knocked on Karen's door. She answered in a bathrobe, her usual crisp appearance replaced by the disheveled look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for criminal negligence and reckless endangerment of a minor." The words seemed to echo in the humid air as Karen's neighbors watched from their windows and doorways. The woman who had appointed herself judge and jury of their community was now facing judgment herself. The community meeting held 1 week later was unlike anything Willowbrook Heights had ever seen. The usually pristine community center was packed beyond capacity. With residents spilling out into the parking lot, local news crews had set up outside, their cameras capturing every moment of what had become a citywide story. Maria Martinez sat in the front row, her eyes red from days of crying and sleepless nights at the hospital. Rosie was stable now, but the doctors had warned that the prolonged high blood sugar levels might have caused permanent damage to her kidneys and nervous system. Patricia Hoffman stood at the podium, her usually composed demeanor cracked by the magnitude of the crisis facing their community. "We are here tonight to address the events of July 15th and to discuss the fundamental changes that must be made to ensure such a tragedy never happens again." The room erupted in voices, angry and sorrowful and demanding. Mrs. Chen stood up first, her voice cutting through the chaos. "For 15 minutes, we watched a child dying while one woman's ego prevented us from helping her. 15 minutes that could have cost Rosie her life." "Where was the accountability?" shouted Mr. Patterson. Karen Whitmore was given authority without oversight, power without responsibility. She turned our community into her personal police state. One by one, residents stood to share their own experiences with Karen's authoritarian tactics. Stories of harassment over minor infractions, threats against visitors, and a pattern of behavior that had transformed their peaceful community into a place where fear ruled over common sense. Young mother Jessica Wells spoke through tears about how Karen had once prevented her from calling 911 when her toddler had a febrile seizure, insisting that children that age often throw tantrums that look like medical emergencies. Only her husband's intervention had prevented a tragedy similar to Rosie's. The stories continued for over an hour, painting a picture of a community that had allowed one person's need for control to override basic human decency and common sense. Finally, Maria Martinez rose to speak. The room fell silent as she walked to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "My daughter almost died because someone decided that her life wasn't worth the inconvenience of making a phone call. Rosie is 11 years old. She loves butterflies and reading books about horses. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She saved her allowance for 3 months to buy her cousin a birthday present." Maria's voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. "She is not a threat to your community. She is not a disruption to your perfect sidewalks. She is a child who was walking to a birthday party when her body betrayed her. And, instead of receiving help, she was treated like a criminal." The silence in the room was absolute. Several residents were openly weeping. "I don't want your apologies," Maria continued. "I want change. I want to make sure that no other child, no other family, ever has to go through what we've experienced." Patricia Hoffman returned to the podium, her voice heavy with emotion. "Mrs. Martinez, on behalf of the entire Willowbrook Heights community, I want to express our deepest regret for what happened to Rosie. But more than that, I want to outline the concrete steps we're taking to ensure this never happens again." She held up a thick document. "This is our new community safety policy, developed in consultation with emergency services, legal experts, and child advocacy groups. It clearly states that any resident has the right to call 911 without interference, that medical emergencies take precedence over all community rules, and that no individual has the authority to prevent someone from receiving medical care." The policy changes were comprehensive and sweeping. The position of community safety officer was eliminated entirely, replaced by a volunteer emergency response team trained in first aid and CPR. Security cameras were installed at all community entrances, and a direct line to emergency services was established. But the most significant change was cultural. The community that had once prided itself on order and conformity began to prioritize compassion and inclusion. A scholarship fund was established in Rosie's name for children with chronic medical conditions. The community center began hosting monthly health and safety workshops, teaching residents how to recognize and respond to medical emergencies. Karen Whitmore's trial became a landmark case in community liability law. The evidence against her was overwhelming: multiple witness testimonies, video footage, and the paramedics' documentation of the delayed response. Her lawyer attempted to argue that she had been acting in good faith as a community volunteer, but the prosecution's case was ironclad. Dr. Amanda Foster, the pediatric endocrinologist who had treated Rosie, testified about the critical importance of immediate intervention in diabetic emergencies. Every minute of delay increases the risk of permanent complications. The 15-minute delay in this case could have been fatal. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Karen was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay substantial damages to the Martinez family. The Homeowners Association, as her employer, was also found liable and ordered to pay additional damages. But the legal consequences were only part of the story. The incident had been captured on multiple phones and security cameras, and the footage had gone viral across social media platforms. Karen's face became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of community compassion. The story sparked a national conversation about the role of homeowners associations and community enforcement. Similar incidents in other communities came to light, leading to legislative changes in several states requiring training and oversight for community safety officers. 6 months after the incident, Rosie Martinez was finally well enough to return to school. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about her recovery, and, while she would need to monitor her health more carefully than before, the permanent damage they had feared had been minimal. On her first day back, she received a surprise visit from the Willowbrook Heights community. Mrs. Chen had organized a welcome-back party, complete with a banner reading, "Welcome Home, Rosie," and a table full of diabetic-friendly treats that the neighbors had researched and prepared themselves. Mr. Patterson, who had completed his emergency medical technician certification in the wake of the incident, presented Rosie with a special medical alert device that would automatically contact emergency services if her blood sugar levels became dangerous. "We want you to know that you're part of our community," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "And we will never let anyone hurt you again." Rosie, still shy about being the center of attention, smiled and hugged the remote control helicopter that Miguel had finally received for his birthday. 3 months late, but twice as appreciated. The transformation of Willowbrook Heights was complete. The community that had once been defined by rigid rules and fear of outsiders had become a model of inclusivity and mutual support. Property values, which had initially suffered after the negative publicity, rebounded as word spread about the community's commitment to safety and compassion. Maria Martinez often walked through the neighborhood with Rosie, both of them welcomed with warm smiles and genuine affection. The sidewalks that had once been a source of Karen's obsessive concern were now filled with children playing, families strolling, and neighbors talking over garden fences. The oak tree where Rosie had intended to find shade on that terrible July day became a focal point of the community's transformation. A small memorial garden was planted beneath it, with a plaque reading, "In memory of childhood innocence lost and community compassion found. May we always choose kindness over control." 1 year after the incident, Rosie Martinez stood before the city council, her voice strong and clear as she advocated for citywide emergency response training. The 11-year-old who had once been dismissed as attention-seeking was now recognized as a powerful voice for change. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," she told the council members. When someone is hurt, we should help them, not question whether they deserve it. That's what makes us human. The council voted unanimously to implement the Rosie Martinez Emergency Response Protocol, requiring all community safety officers throughout the city to receive medical emergency training and establishing clear guidelines for when medical concerns override community rules. Karen Whitmore was released from prison after serving 18 months of her sentence. She emerged to find that the world had moved on without her, that the community she had once controlled with an iron fist had not only survived, but thrived in her absence. She moved to a different state, seeking anonymity and a fresh start, but the lessons of that July day followed her wherever she went. In quiet moments, she could still see Rosie's gray face, still hear the neighbors' voices raised in anger and disbelief. The cost of her pride had been measured not just in legal consequences, but in the near loss of a child's life. Meanwhile, in Willowbrook Heights, summer returned with its blazing heat and humid air. But now the community was prepared. Emergency stations were installed throughout the neighborhood, stocked with water, first aid supplies, and direct communication to emergency services. Shade structures were erected along the main walking paths, and a new community pool was open to all residents and their guests. Rosie Martinez, now 12 and several inches taller, continued to walk through the community on her way to visit cousins and friends. But now, she was never alone. The neighbors who had once been strangers had become an extended family, watching over her and all the children in the community with the fierce protectiveness of those who had learned the true cost of indifference. The remote control helicopter that had fallen from her arms that terrible day was now a cherished possession, a reminder of the journey that had transformed not just her life, but an entire community. Miguel, now 8, had long since mastered its controls, but he still let Rosie fly it whenever she visited, understanding without words that it represented something more than just a toy. On the anniversary of the incident, the community held its first annual Compassion Day, a celebration of the changes that had emerged from tragedy. Local emergency responders led demonstrations of first aid and CPR. Children with chronic conditions shared their stories, and families came together to reinforce the bonds that had been forged in crisis. As the sun set over Willowbrook Heights that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rosie Martinez sat beneath the oak tree, with her medical alert bracelet gleaming in the fading light. The garden around her was in full bloom, tended by dozens of hands that had learned to nurture rather than restrict. The community that had once been defined by rules and boundaries was now characterized by open gates and open hearts. Children played freely in the streets, their laughter echoing off the houses that had once stood in stern judgment. Visitors were welcomed with genuine warmth, and differences were celebrated rather than feared. In the distance, the sounds of an evening barbecue drifted on the warm air. Mrs. Chen was hosting another of her famous community dinners, where diabetic-friendly dishes sat alongside traditional favorites, where conversations flowed in multiple languages, and where the only rule was that everyone was welcome. Rosie smiled as she heard her name called, her mother's voice carrying love and relief that would never fully fade. As she stood to join the celebration, she touched the memorial plaque one last time, its message a permanent reminder of the day that changed everything. The little girl who had once been denied help in her darkest moment had become the catalyst for a transformation that touched hundreds of lives. Her near tragedy had become a story of hope, proving that even the darkest moments can give birth to the brightest light. In the end, Willowbrook Heights had learned the most important lesson of all, that true community safety comes not from rules and restrictions, but from compassion and care. That the strongest neighborhoods are built not on uniformity and control, but on the simple recognition that we are all human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and help when we need it most. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rosie Martinez walked home through streets that had once been hostile territory, but were now a sanctuary of love and acceptance, her footsteps echoing the rhythm of a community that had found its heart.